Have you ever lived in a family that looked peaceful from the outside, but inside was filled with a heavy silence? This is the story of a house where laughter was rare, and silence spoke louder than any words. When I sit down to share this story with you, I don't want you to imagine a distant fairy tale or something abstract that has no connection to your own life. I want you to feel like we're just sitting together, maybe in a living room at the end of a long day, or maybe in the kitchen when the rest of the world has quieted down, and I'm telling you something real, something lived. Because this is not just a story, it's a journey into what it feels like to grow up in a family where silence speaks louder than words, where love is real but complicated, where rules guide your every step, yet those same rules slowly start to feel like walls. Every family has its own rhythm, its own hidden language. Sometimes it's laughter that fills the space, sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's the sound of footsteps moving quickly through a hallway. In this story, the rhythm is silence, heavy silence, the kind that presses down on you until you either break under its weight or push back against it. And that's what I want to bring you into, not as an outsider watching from a distance, but as if you are living inside this house, hearing the creaks of the wooden floor, smelling the soup simmering on the stove, feeling the tension that lingers in the air, even when no one says a word. This house is not broken down, not abandoned, but it carries the weight of time. The walls seem to breathe with memories. The curtains sway even when the windows are shut. The air itself holds secrets. And in this house lives a family that to the outside world looks ordinary. Neighbors see them in the yard, smiling politely, waving hello, appearing no different from anyone else. But inside, each person carries their own storm. The father is a man of silence. He doesn't need to raise his voice because his quietness is heavy enough. He reads the newspaper each morning, his glasses sliding down his nose, his presence commanding without effort. When he does speak, it is as though a stone has been dropped into a still pond, ripples spread, slowly but inevitably, touching everyone in the room. The mother is the opposite. She is sound, she is motion. Her voice fills every corner, her footsteps echo from room to room, her laughter when it comes is bright and full, but so is her anger. The children grow up between these two forces, learning to navigate the pull of silence and the push of noise. There are rules here, rules that are never spoken aloud, but are etched into the rhythm of daily life. Don't question the father when he is quiet. Don't interrupt your mother when she is moving fast through her chores. Don't ask about the past. Don't leave the table before everyone is done. These rules are never written down. No one sits the children down to explain them, but they are understood as clearly as the smell of coffee in the kitchen each morning. And that is how family works. You don't need a manual. You just need enough shared silence, enough repeated patterns to know what can and cannot be said. But silence is a dangerous thing. It grows like vines, slowly wrapping around everything, tightening until the air feels thin. In this house, silence is both a shield and a prison. The father uses it to protect himself, to hold his ground. The mother fights against it with her voice. But even this family carries a legacy, but not the kind you find written in history books, not wealth or fame or stories of glory. Their legacy is survival. The father worked jobs he did not love to put food on the table. The mother gave up sleep and comfort so that the children would never feel the ache of hunger. And the children know this, feel this, even if no one tells them outright. They feel the weight of sacrifice handed down like an heirloom. The father's unspoken message is, "I gave up my dreams so you could have yours." The mother's unspoken message is, "I carried this burden so you could walk lighter." But the children know, even without words, that when love is tied to sacrifice, it also becomes a debt. They grow up believing they must repay it, even if it means giving up their own freedom. It is love, yes, but it is also a burden, and that is what shapes them. The real story begins on a Sunday morning. The sun filters through the curtains in soft golden lines. The smell of soup fills the air, and the mother hums to herself in the kitchen. The father sits at the table with his newspaper, as he always does, glasses perched low, his silence filling the room. One by one the children shuffle in, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Sundays are supposed to be peaceful, a day of rest, but in this house peace is fragile. It rests on glass, and glass can shatter. That morning it begins to crack. It happens with a question. The middle child, with the kind of boldness that only comes from curiosity, asks, "Why do we always eat the same thing on Sundays?" It seems harmless, doesn't it? Just a child wondering. But in this house, questions are dangerous because they poke at the fabric of tradition, and tradition here is everything. The mother freezes, her spoon hovering over the pot. The father lowers his newspaper, just enough to show his eyes. The silence thickens, and everyone feels it. Finally, the mother answers, not in anger but with a sharpness that cuts deeper than shouting, because that's the way it is. That's the way it has always been. And that ends the conversation, outwardly. But inside, in the heart of the child who asked, a seed has been planted. That's how change begins. Not with dramatic rebellion, but with a small thought that refuses to go away. The child doesn't stop wondering. Instead, the question grows louder. Why do we follow rules we don't understand? Why do we repeat patterns that don't bring joy? Why is tradition more important than choice? And once that seed is planted, it begins to grow. You don't notice it right away, but it's there, pushing at the soil, reaching toward the light. The family table is the center of everything in this house. Meals are not just about eating, they are about order, about power, about roles. Where you sit matters, who speaks first matters. What you say or don't say matters. At that Sunday meal, the soup is ladled, the bread is sliced, the rules are followed, but beneath the surface, tension simmers. Every spoonful is heavy with unspoken words. Every glance carries weight. Everyone feels it, though no one dares to name it. Something has shifted. The silence is no longer complete. A crack has appeared. Inside the mind of the child, everything feels different now. Imagine being young, full of curiosity, with questions you can't yet put into perfect words. Imagine realizing for the first time that the rules you've been taught might not be the only way to live. It's frightening, it's thrilling, it's the beginning of independence, but also the beginning of distance from the very people you love most. And that is the complexity of family. The same love that ties you together is the same love that makes it so hard to pull away. The day ends as it always does. The dishes are washed, the house grows quiet, evening folds in, but something lingers, something invisible but strong. The child sits by the window, staring at the world outside. The street looks wider than before. The trees look taller. The sky looks full of possibility. And though the door to this life has not yet opened, it is now slightly ajar. Change begins like that, not with a bang, but with a whisper, not with an escape, but with a thought that refuses to fade. So this is the beginning, the first step into a story of love, silence, rebellion, and growth. A family that looks whole from the outside, but inside is shifting, piece by piece. A child who dares to question, a silence that begins to crack. And as the story continues, we'll see how those questions grow into conflicts, how traditions are tested, how bonds are stretched, and how love, imperfect, stubborn, and unshakable, still finds its way through. Because family stories are never simple. They don't move in straight lines. They spiral, they twist. They bring us forward and pull us back. They hurt us and heal us, sometimes at the same time. This is only the beginning, and there is so much more to come. The days after that Sunday morning unfold like they always do on the surface. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm, something invisible begins to move. Children still wake up for school. The father still goes to work. The mother still keeps the house in order. But there is a subtle change in the air. You know that feeling when a storm is coming, when the sky looks the same but you sense a shift in the wind? That's what lingers in this house. The question asked by the middle child refuses to disappear. It echoes in silence, like a stone thrown into water that keeps rippling long after it sinks. No one mentions it again, but everyone remembers it. The father buries himself deeper in his routines. He wakes early, drinks his coffee in silence, folds his newspaper carefully, as though the order of pages can hold his world steady. His silence has always been heavy, but now it feels like a shield that he polishes daily. He cannot allow cracks to show, because cracks invite questions, and questions invite change. And change, to him, feels like betrayal of everything he has worked for. The mother doubles down on her rituals too. She cleans with more intensity, cooks with more precision, makes sure each meal follows the rhythm she has always kept. To her, order is safety. She hums while she works, but even her humming has changed. It no longer drifts like a carefree tune. It has a sharpness, almost like she is reminding herself not to falter. And the children, they are watching. That's what children always do, even when adults think they aren't. They watch, they notice, they carry every glance, every sigh, every silence. The eldest tries to keep the peace, slipping into the role of mediator, making small jokes at the table to ease tension, helping the mother when she looks tired. The youngest clings to innocence, pretending not to notice, playing with toys longer than usual, hiding in make-believe worlds. But the middle child, the one who asks the dangerous question, cannot stop thinking. Curiosity, once awakened, does not go back to sleep. They start noticing other patterns too. Why does the father always avoid certain topics in conversation? Why does the mother look out the window when she thinks no one is watching? Why are there family photographs missing from the wall where dust outlines their absence? Once you begin to question, you see more than you ever wanted to. Family is like a mirror. It shows you not only who you are, but also what has been hidden for years. And for a child discovering this, it feels both like stepping into the light and stumbling into the dark at the same time. There is excitement in realizing the world is bigger than the walls of your home, but there is fear in realizing those walls may not protect you the way you thought they did. Each night, the child lies awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of their parents moving about, the creaks of footsteps, the clatter of dishes being put away. These sounds used to be comforting, the rhythm of security, but now they feel like codes waiting to be cracked. Why is the house always so quiet after certain conversations? Why does the father disappear into silence instead of answering questions? One evening, the child gathers courage to ask another question. This time, it is softer, more careful. They are sitting with the mother in the kitchen as she folds laundry. The air smells of soap and starch. The light is dim, and the child says, "Mom, do you ever wish things were different?" The question lands between them like a fragile glass. The mother pauses, holding a shirt in her hands. She doesn't look at the child right away. Instead, she smooths the fabric over her lap, her fingers trembling slightly. When she finally speaks, her voice is steady but thin, like ice about to crack. "Different is dangerous," she says. "Different means losing what we have. And what we have, even if it's not perfect, is ours." She forces a smile, pats the child's hand, and changes the subject to homework. But the child knows. The hesitation, the tremble, the way her eyes flickered away, all of it reveals more than words ever could. She does wish for different, but she has buried that wish under years of duty. The father, meanwhile, notices the shift too. He sees the questions forming in his child's eyes, and it unsettles him. His own childhood was built on obedience. He never dared to question his father. He accepted rules as unchangeable. And to see his own child beginning to push against silence feels like a threat, not only to his authority, but to his identity. So he responds the only way he knows how, with more silence, more distance. At dinner, his eyes linger on the middle child longer than before, as if trying to warn them without speaking. But warnings only work if fear outweighs curiosity, and in this case curiosity has already taken root. It is in the schoolyard that the child finds the first real taste of freedom. Among friends, laughter comes easier, questions are not forbidden, stories are exchanged without fear of being silenced. The contrast is sharp. At school, the world feels wide open. At home, it feels narrow. And soon, the child begins to wonder, why can't home feel like that too? This is where rebellion begins, not with shouting matches or slamming doors, but with the simple act of imagining a different possibility. And yet, as the child dreams, guilt follows close behind. Because family is not only rules, it is also love. They love their parents deeply. They know the sacrifices made. They have eaten the meals cooked with care, slept under the roof earned through hard work. How can they wish for more without feeling ungrateful? This guilt twists inside, making each question heavier. It is the paradox of growing up, to want freedom while still feeling tethered to love. One rainy afternoon becomes a turning point. The father comes home earlier than usual, his shoulders hunched, his face tired. He sits in his chair, staring out the window, saying nothing. The mother places tea in front of him, but he doesn't touch it. The children sense something unusual. The youngest hides behind a toy, the eldest retreats to their room, but the middle child lingers. Quietly, almost without meaning to, the child asks, "Are you okay?" The words seem simple, but in this house they are extraordinary. The father looks up, startled, as though no one has ever asked him that before. For a moment, the silence breaks. His lips part, as if he is about to speak, but then he shakes his head and returns to staring out the window. The child sees something in his eyes, though something fragile, something human. And that moment, fleeting as it is, changes everything. Because silence may be heavy, but it is not impenetrable. Over the next days, the child begins to notice more cracks in the facade. The father's silence hides not strength, but exhaustion. The mother's busyness hides longing. The family traditions that seem solid are really fragile threads holding everything together. And the child realizes, questioning is not betrayal. Questioning is seeing the truth more clearly. But with truth comes conflict. At the next Sunday meal, the middle child makes a small, daring move. Instead of waiting for the parents to begin, they start speaking first, telling a story from school, their voice louder than usual. The father's eyes narrow, the mother stiffens, the eldest looks worried, but the child continues. It is not an argument, not yet, but it is a declaration. I will not always stay silent. I will not always follow without asking why. And though the table remains orderly, though the soup is served and the bread is eaten, something irreversible has happened. The dynamic has shifted. The silence no longer rules completely. A new voice has entered the room, tentative but determined. This is how transformation begins in families, not in grand explosions, but in quiet defiance. A child choosing to speak first, a parent almost admitting pain, a mother almost confessing desire for change. Small cracks, but cracks that widen with time, and once they appear, they cannot be unseen. That night, as the house grows quiet again, the middle child lies awake, thinking of the world outside the window. The trees sway in the wind, the sky seems endless, and for the first time, the child feels both fear and excitement mixing together. Fear of what it means to challenge what has always been. Excitement at the possibility of something more. And deep inside, beneath the guilt, beneath the confusion, one thought grows stronger. Maybe life doesn't have to be this way forever. The weeks pass, and with each passing day the air inside the house grows thicker, like clouds gathering before a storm that no one wants to name. Outwardly, everything looks the same. The father still wears his silence like armor, the mother still rushes about with her endless rhythm of chores and meals, the eldest still tries to keep the peace, and the youngest still hides in play. But the middle child, the one who has begun to push against the invisible walls, feels the difference every moment. They can't unsee it now. They can't pretend not to notice the cracks. Once you've caught a glimpse of the truth, you can't go back to believing the illusion. It lingers in every silence, in every small interaction. At school, the child finds themselves asking more questions, speaking more freely, testing their voice in a way that feels impossible at home. Teachers begin to notice. One calls on them more often, smiles at their curiosity, encourages them, and though the child blushes under the attention, they also feel something like pride blooming inside. At school, their voice is welcomed. At home, their voice is a disturbance. This contrast grows sharper, and the child begins to resent the silence at home, begins to feel that the traditions which once seemed solid are nothing but chains. One Friday evening, the family sits down to dinner as they always do. The food is laid out with care, the table set in the same familiar order. But this time, when the father asks the eldest about their studies, the middle child blurts out, "Why don't you ever ask me?" The words are loud, louder than intended, and the room falls still. The eldest lowers their gaze. The mother freezes with a serving spoon in hand. The father slowly lifts his eyes. He stares at the child for what feels like eternity, the silence stretching like an iron rope pulled tight. Finally, he says, "You talk too much already." His voice is not raised, but it lands like a blow. The child flushes red, their chest tightening, but inside, something hardens. It is no longer just curiosity now. It is defiance. Later that night, lying in bed, the child replays the words again and again. "You talk too much already." At first the words sting, but then they start to transform. Maybe talking too much is not a flaw. Maybe it is strength. Maybe silence is not the only way to survive. The thought burns like a small fire inside, giving off both heat and danger. The mother senses the fire too. She has lived long enough to recognize rebellion when it begins. She sees it in the way the child's eyes linger too long on the father's silence, in the way they push back at small rules. Part of her wants to crush it, to keep order, to protect the family's fragile balance. But another part of her, a part she rarely lets surface, admires it. She sees in her child the courage she once had before life pressed it out of her. And in quiet moments, when no one is watching, she almost smiles. But admiration does not mean freedom. The house is still bound by its rules, and rules push back when they are threatened. One afternoon, the father comes home earlier than usual. He finds the child at the table, drawing pictures instead of finishing homework. He takes the paper without a word, studies it for a moment, then rips it in half. The sound of tearing paper slices through the room like a scream. The child's eyes fill with tears, but they do not cry out. They simply stare at him, their jaw set, their fists clenched. The father expects to see fear, but what he sees instead is fury. And for the first time, he feels something unexpected, unease. That night the parents argue behind closed doors. Their voices are muffled but sharp. The children hear the rise and fall of tones, the rhythm of accusation and defense. The eldest slips into the role of comforter, gathering the younger ones, telling them not to worry. But the middle child listens harder, memorizing each word that leaks through the door. Words about control, about responsibility, about how things are changing too fast. The child realizes then that the parents are not as unshakable as they appear. They too are caught in struggles they cannot fully control, and somehow this knowledge both frightens and emboldens the child. Days stretch into weeks, and the tension becomes a constant background hum. The middle child begins spending more time outside the house, walking the streets, watching other families. They notice differences, families who laugh more, who argue openly but also hug afterward, who break rules without fear. And each glimpse makes the walls of their own house feel narrower. They begin to dream of leaving, of finding a space where their voice is not just tolerated, but welcomed. Yet the guilt always returns. To leave feels like betrayal. To stay feels like suffocation. This is the war inside them, a war with no clear winner. One evening, as rain beats against the windows, the child sits with the mother in the kitchen. The world outside is blurred, but inside the room is warm with the smell of baking bread. The mother seems tired, her eyes heavy, her hands slower than usual. The child watches her and finally whispers, "Mom, are you happy?" The mother's hands still. She does not answer immediately. Instead, she wipes the counter, adjusts the bread in the oven, pours a glass of water. Only then does she turn and meet the child's eyes. "Happiness is not for people like us," she says softly. "We have enough. That is what matters." The child's throat tightens. Enough. Always enough. But never joy. Never freedom. That night, the child dreams of running down a road with no end, the wind in their face, their voice shouting into the sky without anyone telling them it's too much. They wake with their heart pounding, the dream clinging to them like a promise. The more they dream, the more the silence at home feels unbearable. The father notices the distance growing. He sees the way the child looks at him, not with admiration, but with challenge. It unsettles him deeply. He remembers his own youth, remembers the way he bowed his head, swallowed his questions, obeyed without hesitation. He thought that was strength. To see his child choosing the opposite path feels like losing control. And losing control terrifies him more than anything else. So he grips tighter, enforcing rules more strictly, demanding obedience in small things. But the tighter he grips, the more the child pulls away. Conflict finally erupts one evening at dinner. The father makes a remark about wasting time on foolish thoughts. The child, unable to hold back, blurts out, "Maybe if you ever listened, you'd understand." The room freezes. The eldest stares in shock, the youngest drops their spoon, the mother gasps, the father's face darkens, his silence heavy as thunder. For a long moment, no one breathes. Then he slams his hand on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. The meal ends abruptly, everyone scattering to their corners. But the words have been spoken, and they cannot be taken back. That night, the house feels different. The silence is not just heavy, it is broken. The child lies in bed, trembling, unsure whether they've destroyed something or set something free. Perhaps both. They know punishment will come, but they also know they cannot return to silence. The crack has widened, the door has opened a little more, and somewhere deep inside, despite the fear, there is also relief. For the first time, they have spoken their truth out loud. This is how change continues, not in a single moment, but in waves. Each confrontation leaves scars, but each scar also carries strength. The family will never be the same again, and the child knows it. The question now is not whether change will come, but what it will cost. Morning light filters through the curtains, as if nothing has changed, but everyone in the house knows that everything has. The air carries the weight of the argument that shattered the silence days earlier. No one speaks of it directly, yet it lingers in the way the father's jaw stays tight when he reads the paper, in the way the mother moves faster through her chores, as if trying to outrun the memory of it, in the way the eldest keeps busy with studies to avoid stepping into the storm. And in the middle child, who stares at the world outside with eyes sharper than before, the moment has etched itself deeply. Words once spoken cannot be unsaid, and now the child knows their own voice, once timid, can break through the silence of the house. At school, the child begins to speak more boldly. When teachers ask questions, the hand goes up quickly. Friends notice the difference too. Some admire the courage, others tease, but all feel the shift. At home, though, the voice still carries weight like a loaded stone. Every dinner is a careful dance. The father pretends calm, but his silence is heavier, watchful. The mother tries to smooth things with forced laughter, with extra servings of food, with stories that drift but never land. The eldest offers small distractions, joking about school, asking about errands, filling space with words that float above the tension. But underneath, everyone waits. The next spark, the next crack, the next unavoidable collision. The child lies awake at night, staring at the ceiling, heart racing with thoughts too big for their small frame. The dream of freedom is growing. It flickers like a lantern in the darkness, calling, but it also terrifies. To step away means leaving behind not only the rules, but the love woven into them. For no matter how heavy the silence, no matter how sharp the words, this is still family. And love is the root tangled deep, making it impossible to cut cleanly without tearing yourself apart. One Saturday afternoon, the house is quiet, the father napping in his chair, the mother sewing by the window. The child sneaks into the small attic room, dusty and filled with forgotten boxes. They search through old photographs, yellowed letters, fragments of lives lived before they were born. And there, hidden among the papers, they find something startling, a picture of their mother, young and smiling, dressed differently, standing beside a man who is not their father. The image feels like a secret whispered across time. The child stares at it, their heart pounding. Who was she then? What dream lived in her eyes before duty pressed it down? The picture slips into their pocket, a forbidden treasure, a piece of truth that suddenly changes how they see everything. That evening, unable to hold it in, the child asks quietly, "Mom, who is this?" The mother freezes. The color drains from her face. She takes the photo, holds it to her chest, and whispers, "Where did you find this?" The child hesitates, then says, "In the attic." For a long moment, the mother says nothing, only stares at the picture as though staring into another lifetime. Then she sighs, a sound heavy with years, and says, "That was before I chose this life, before I knew what family costs." She tries to take the photo away, but the child presses, "Why did you stop smiling like that?" The question hangs in the air like a fragile thread, and for the first time, the mother cannot hide behind duty. Tears well in her eyes. She doesn't answer. Instead, she leaves the room, the photo still in her hand, her silence louder than any confession. The child feels shaken, torn between guilt for asking and hunger for the truth. They realize then that even parents are not immune to the weight of unspoken dreams. Even they are bound by choices that carved paths too narrow to leave. And if the mother once had a life beyond these walls, maybe the child can too. The thought takes root, feeding the fire that has been growing quietly inside. The father senses the shift in the child more and more. He sees the questions in their eyes, the challenge in their stance. His own fear grows sharper. He has built his life on obedience, on silence, on keeping the world outside from invading. To him, questioning is not growth, it is danger. And danger must be stopped. So, he begins to lay down rules more firmly. He insists on curfews, on chores done exactly so, on respect given without hesitation. He thinks by tightening his grip, he can hold the family steady, but the tighter he grips, the more the child pulls away. The eldest watches this unfolding with quiet dread. They see both sides, feel the love for their parents and the longing for freedom in their sibling. They try to mediate, try to soften edges, but they too feel the tension rising. The youngest senses it as well, though they cannot name it. They cling to play, to innocence, to anything that shields them from the storm gathering around them. Then comes the night that everything shifts again. A neighbor invites the family over for a small gathering. Music plays, laughter rings out, people speak freely. The child watches in wonder as adults tell stories, joke loudly, even argue without fear of silence. It feels like stepping into another world, one where rules bend and people breathe differently. When the father notices the child staring, he places a firm hand on their shoulder, guiding them back to the corner, his grip a silent command. But the child cannot unsee what they have seen. There are other ways to live, other families exist, and suddenly the walls of their own home feel like a cage closing tighter. That night, lying in bed, the child makes a quiet promise to themselves. They will not let silence decide who they become. They will not bury their questions or crush their dreams to fit into a mold that suffocates them. The promise is small, whispered only to the dark ceiling above, but it carries the power of a seed planted deep. Days stretch into weeks, the tension rising like water filling a glass to the brim. The father's silence grows harsher, the mother's eyes grow more distant, the eldest grows weary of being the peacemaker, and the youngest grows quieter. But the middle child grows stronger. Their voice may tremble, their heart may pound, but each time they speak, each time they push back, they claim a little more space for themselves. The turning point comes on a Sunday once again, because Sundays in this family always carry weight. The same soup is served, the same bread sliced, the same order followed. But when the father insists on the same old story about duty, the child interrupts. Maybe duty isn't everything. Maybe happiness matters too. The words land like thunder. The mother's spoon clatters. The eldest goes pale. The youngest stares wide-eyed. The father freezes, his face unreadable. Silence stretches so long it feels like the world has stopped. And then, in a voice low but steady, the father says, "You don't know what you're talking about." But the child does know. They may not understand everything, but they know enough to see that silence has cost this family too much already. They look at their father, not with fear now, but with determination. And in that moment, even though no one moves, even though the meal continues, the balance shifts forever. Because once someone in a family claims their right to speak, nothing can ever go back to the way it was. The days after that Sunday unfold in uneasy quiet, like a house holding its breath. Every sound seems sharper, every glance carries weight. The middle child walks through the rooms with a new awareness, no longer just moving in step with the unspoken rules, but noticing each detail as if the walls themselves are whispering. The father sits longer at the table with his paper, eyes fixed, though he reads the same lines again and again. The mother works faster, cleaning already clean surfaces, folding clothes that don't need folding, her hands restless because her heart is restless. The eldest buries themselves in study, taking on tasks without being asked, trying to hold everything together with dutiful silence. The youngest plays quietly, their toys scattered like tiny shields against the tension that grows thicker with each passing day. And the middle child, though frightened by the words they spoke, feels a strange sense of strength. They dared to name the thing no one else would, dared to suggest happiness might matter. The echo of their own voice lingers inside them like a flame refusing to be snuffed out. But flames, once lit, draw attention. The father watches more closely now. His silence is not empty but calculating, his eyes narrowing whenever the child dares to speak too freely. He believes discipline will restore balance, so he sets rules with sharper edges. Homework must be finished before dusk, chores must be done without complaint, words at the table must be measured, respectful, restrained. He thinks control will protect his family from falling apart, but control, when held too tightly, only pushes harder against the one who resists it. The child feels it every moment. They feel the eyes on them, the invisible grip around their words, and inside, resistance grows. At school, freedom tastes sweeter than ever. They laugh louder with friends, speak up without hesitation, even volunteer for things they once shied away from. Teachers nod in approval. One even says, "You have a strong voice. Don't lose it." The words strike deep, like water on parched ground. Don't lose it. They tuck those words into their heart, carrying them home like a secret talisman. Because at home, the voice is not celebrated, it is a threat. and the contrast between the two worlds is becoming unbearable. One evening, the mother calls the children to help with dinner. The middle child enters the kitchen and sees her standing by the stove, her shoulders slumped, her face lined with weariness. For the first time, the child notices not just the movements but the weight behind them. "Mom," they ask softly, "do you ever get tired?" The mother glances over, startled, then forces a smile. "Of course not. This is my life." But the child catches the flicker in her eyes, the truth she cannot admit. Tired is too small a word. She is weary, bound by years of sacrifice that no one ever asked her if she wanted to make. The child wants to press further but stops. They have learned enough to know that sometimes the silence of parents is not meant to be broken all at once. It has to be unraveled slowly. The eldest begins to notice too. They pull the middle child aside one afternoon, whispering sharply, "Why do you always have to stir things up? Can't you just stay quiet?" The middle child bites their lip, then answers, "Because if I stay quiet, nothing will ever change." The eldest shakes their head, torn between fear and admiration. They want peace, but they know peace built on silence is fragile, false. Yet their own role, the peacemaker, feels like a chain too. They cannot break it without breaking themselves. So they retreat, leaving the middle child more alone but also more certain of their path. The youngest, though too small to understand everything, senses the shift. They cling more often to the middle child, following them around, asking endless questions, mimicking their defiance in small ways. When told to put away toys, the youngest sometimes pauses, eyes narrowing, testing the boundary. It is both innocent and revolutionary. Even the smallest child feels the tremors of change, and the middle child realizes with a mix of pride and fear that their rebellion is contagious. Then comes a night of storm. Rain lashes the windows, thunder shakes the walls. The family gathers in the living room, the lights flickering. The father sits rigid, the mother wrings her hands, the children huddle close. In the flashes of lightning, the child sees their family clearly, not as untouchable figures, but as fragile humans caught in a storm, inside and out. The father, so proud, so silent, looks suddenly small, a man weighed down by burdens he never speaks. The mother, so constant, so restless, looks like a woman who once dreamed of more. The eldest looks like someone already carrying too much. The youngest clutches a toy for comfort, wide-eyed, and in that moment, the middle child feels both compassion and determination. They see the love beneath the silence, the sacrifice beneath the rules. But they also see the cost, and they know someone has to break the cycle. The next day, after the storm has passed, the father sets the children to work, repairing small leaks, tightening shutters, sweeping debris. His silence is firm, but his movements are slower, more tired. The middle child works without complaint, but cannot stop their mind from racing. They wonder if storms come not only to damage, but also to reveal what is weak, what needs rebuilding. And maybe this family too needs rebuilding. Not destroyed, but rebuilt, on something stronger than silence, rebuilt on honesty, on love that is not tied only to duty. The opportunity comes unexpectedly. One evening, the father forgets himself. He comes home later than usual, smelling faintly of smoke and exhaustion. He sits heavily in his chair, his eyes distant. The child, nervous but brave, sits across from him and asks, "What was it like when you were my age?" The father blinks, surprised. At first, he doesn't answer. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he says, "When I was your age, I didn't have time to ask questions. I worked. I obeyed. That's how it was." His voice is sharp, but beneath it, the child hears something else, sorrow. They press gently, "But did you want more?" For a fleeting moment, the father's mask slips, his eyes soften, his shoulders sag. Then, just as quickly, the wall returns. "Wanting more is dangerous," he mutters. "It makes you weak." He stands, ends the conversation, leaves the child staring at the empty chair. But the child knows what they saw, a glimpse of truth buried deep. The father is not made of stone, he is made of flesh, of dreams crushed, of silence learned the hard way, and if even he once wanted more, maybe there is hope. The days go on, but the rhythm is no longer steady. Each interaction feels charged. At meals, the silence is interrupted by questions too bold to ignore. At chores, small rebellions slip through. The father grows more rigid, the mother more anxious, the eldest more weary. Yet the middle child grows stronger. Their voice no longer trembles, their questions no longer fade. And though fear still lingers, it no longer controls them. One afternoon, while walking home from school, the child passes a park where families laugh openly, their voices carrying freely into the air. They stop and watch, their heart aching with longing. They imagine a life where their own family could laugh like that, where love could be loud and joyful instead of heavy and silent. And in that moment, they make another promise. They will not only find freedom for themselves, they will one day create a home where silence is not a prison, but a choice, where voices are not punished, but cherished. The promise feels impossible, but also necessary. At night, they write in secret, scribbling thoughts into a notebook hidden under the mattress. Words they cannot say aloud, dreams they cannot yet live. Each page becomes a small rebellion, a seed of a future not yet real but already alive. The notebook becomes their refuge, their mirror, their hope. And though no one else knows, the act of writing itself strengthens them. They are no longer just surviving, they are imagining. And imagination, once awakened, is unstoppable. The house grows heavier with every passing season, not because of new rules or louder arguments, but because of the weight of what has already been said, the words that once dared to break through and can never be forgotten. The middle child carries them like a secret badge of honor, both proud and burdened, because once you've spoken against silence, silence itself is never the same again. The father feels it too. His control is no longer unquestioned, his silence no longer absolute. He sees the way his child looks at him now, not with fear, not with blind obedience, but with something unsettling determination. The mother feels it most of all. She watches from the edges, her heart caught between two worlds, the one built on rules and duty that she has lived inside all her life, and the one flickering in her child's eyes, a world where love might be louder than sacrifice, where happiness might matter as much as survival. The eldest grows quieter, weighed down by the role of peacemaker, their shoulders bending under a responsibility too heavy for their years. And the youngest drifts in and out of innocence, sensing the storm but not yet able to name it, holding on to toys and laughter as though they can shield them from the inevitable. One morning, as dawn seeps into the kitchen, the child wakes early and sits at the table before anyone else. The house is silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. They look at the empty chairs, the plates waiting to be filled, the space where so many unspoken battles have been fought. The table, once just wood and nails, feels alive to them now, like a witness to everything. They whisper softly to themselves, "I will not be silent here anymore." It is not for anyone else to hear, but the words echo inside them, solidifying the promise already made. At school, their confidence grows. They speak in class, they lead small groups, they stand up for a friend being teased. Teachers nod, some impressed, some surprised. Classmates begin to notice too. Some call them brave, others call them stubborn, but no one can ignore them anymore. For the child, each word spoken outside the house feels like practice, like training for the battle still waiting at home. They discover that the more they speak, the stronger they become. And the stronger they become, the harder it is to go back into silence. But at home, every act of resistance carries consequences. The father notices the shift. He sees the confidence in the child's step, the defiance in their eyes. He responds with sharper commands, stricter punishments. When chores are not done perfectly, he scolds harshly. When voices rise too loud, he slams the table. When questions are asked, he cuts them down with silence heavy enough to suffocate. He thinks he is restoring order, but all he is doing is fueling the fire. Because the child no longer trembles, they no longer shrink back. They meet his silence with stares that do not break, with words that will not die in their throat. The mother tries to intervene, her voice softer, pleading for calm. She urges her child to be patient, to understand, to wait. But her words fall like thin blankets over a fire too hot to smother. The child loves her, but they cannot accept her surrender. They see in her eyes the life she gave up, the dreams she buried, and they refuse to follow the same path. They will not let their voice be extinguished. The eldest becomes more desperate in their attempts to hold the family together. They step in during arguments, distract the father, soothe the mother, comfort the youngest, pull the middle child aside with whispers of caution. "Please just stop," they beg one night. "You're tearing everything apart." But the middle child shakes their head. "I'm not tearing it apart. I'm showing what was already broken." The words sting, not because they are cruel, but because they are true. The eldest has always known it deep down, but naming it makes it real, and real is terrifying. The youngest begins to mirror the rebellion in small ways. When told to put toys away, they hesitate. When scolded, they pout with stubbornness instead of crying. The parents notice and blame the middle child. "You're a bad example," the father says, voice like thunder. But the child does not apologize. Instead, they look at their sibling and smile faintly, as if passing a torch too bright to extinguish. Then comes another Sunday, the day that always carries the heaviest weight. The soup simmers, the bread is sliced, the table is set. But even as the ritual unfolds, everyone knows it is no longer the same. The father's silence is brittle, the mother's laughter forced, the eldest tense, the youngest restless, and the middle child, sitting straighter than ever, waits. When the father begins to speak of duty, repeating the same words he has said countless times, the child interrupts. "Maybe we don't have to keep doing things the same way forever." The room freezes. The father glares, his jaw tightening. The mother's hands tremble. The eldest looks like they might cry. The youngest leans forward, wide-eyed. The father's voice cuts like a blade. "This is my house, my rules," the child answers, steady and unshaken. "It's our house too." The words are small, but they hit like lightning. The table becomes a battlefield without movement, each person holding their breath, waiting for the storm. The father rises slowly, his silence heavier than thunder. But this time, the child does not flinch. They hold his gaze, their heart pounding but their voice steady. The moment stretches, unbearable, then breaks when the mother stands abruptly, her voice sharp with fear. "Enough, no more tonight." She gathers dishes, her hands clattering as she moves too quickly. The father sinks back into his chair, the eldest lowers their head, the youngest clings to their spoon, and the middle child, though shaken, feels victory burning in their chest. For the first time, they did not retreat. That night, they lie awake again, but instead of fear, they feel a strange calm. They know punishment may come tomorrow, they know the storm is far from over, but they also know they spoke their truth, and the world did not end. The walls did not collapse, the silence did not win, and that knowledge is power. The days that follow are tense. The father is quieter, watching, his silence sharp as knives. The mother is distant, lost in thoughts she won't share. The eldest avoids eye contact, carrying invisible weight. The youngest hums softly to themselves, perhaps imitating the mother's old habit, as though trying to create comfort where none exists. And the middle child continues forward, step by step, word by word, refusing to let fear dictate their place. One afternoon, Walking home from school, they pass the same park filled with laughter. Families sit on blankets, voices ringing out freely. For the first time, the child does not just watch with longing. They imagine themselves there, older, free, building a life where silence is not law, where love is not bound by fear. And in that imagining, they feel hope stronger than ever before. They know the path ahead will not be easy. It will wound, it will demand sacrifice, it will test their courage. But they also know they cannot turn back. The crack has widened too much, the door opened too far. They will not go back into the silence, and somewhere, deep inside, they begin to realize something even more powerful. Maybe their rebellion is not just for themselves, maybe it is for all of them. For the mother who lost her smile, for the father who buried his dreams, for the eldest who carries too much, for the youngest who deserves more. Maybe the fight for a voice is not selfish but necessary, the only way to rebuild what has been broken for so long. And that thought, heavy and hopeful, becomes their quiet mission. Because love, real love, cannot survive forever in silence. It needs words, it needs laughter, it needs freedom. And though the house is still heavy, though silence still reigns, the child knows the future will not belong to silence forever. The weight of unspoken battles begins to change the rhythm of the house in ways so small they might escape notice at first, yet each one matters. The father no longer looks only at his paper when he sits at the table. Now his eyes flicker more often toward the middle child, watchful, suspicious, as though he is waiting for the next spark. The mother's humming, once a constant in the kitchen, grows rare, as if each note costs her too much. The eldest withdraws further, spending longer hours tucked away with books or errands, trying to disappear into duty. The youngest, sensing what they cannot fully understand, clings more tightly to the middle child, following them around like a shadow, seeking warmth where the air feels colder. And the middle child, though carrying fear in their chest, cannot stop themselves. The seed of defiance has grown roots too deep. Once a voice has tasted freedom, silence no longer feels like safety. It feels like suffocation. At school, the child thrives in the spaces that allow questions, where curiosity is rewarded instead of punished. Teachers nod with approval when the hand shoots up. Classmates gather, some drawn by the fire of confidence, others by the boldness of speaking without fear. There are whispers that they might grow into a leader, though the child doesn't think of it that way. They are simply breathing where they cannot at home. Each word spoken in that world feels like oxygen, and each step back into the house feels like returning to a cage. The contrast sharpens their resolve. If such freedom can exist outside, why should it be denied inside? One evening, when the house has settled into its quiet routine, the middle child slips into the attic again. Dust thickens the air, boxes lie forgotten, filled with fragments of the past. They sift through old letters, scraps of fabric, photographs faded by time. Among them, they find another picture, this time of their father, young and unsmiling, standing beside men in uniforms, his eyes sharp, his posture rigid. The child stares, unsettled. The man in the photo looks the same, and not the same. There is strength there, yes, but also something else, something that looks like fear disguised as discipline. For the first time, the child wonders if the father's silence was not chosen but learned, drilled into him by others before. Perhaps he is not only the warden of this prison but also its prisoner. The thought unsettles and softens them at once. Anger remains, but now it carries threads of pity. Later that night, curiosity outweighs caution. They ask at the table, voice steady but soft, "Dad, what was it like when you were young?" The father freezes, his spoon halfway to his mouth. The mother glances nervously at him, the eldest tenses, the youngest watches wide-eyed. For a long moment, silence stretches, then the father answers gruffly, "Hard, harder than you know." His tone is final, a warning not to push further. But the child, emboldened by the glimpse of truth, presses gently, "Did you ever want something different?" The father slams the spoon down, his eyes flashing. "Wanting doesn't put food on the table," he snaps. The room goes still. The eldest lowers their head. The mother reaches for dishes to distract. The youngest shrinks into their seat. The middle child says nothing more, but inside their mind the thought refuses to die. Even in his anger, the father had not said no. He had said wanting was dangerous, useless, weak, which means he did want. Once. The mother lingers in the kitchen that night, her movements slower than usual. When the others have gone to bed, the child stays with her, pretending to help, but really just waiting. Finally, quietly, the mother whispers, "He did want more, once. But life doesn't always let you choose." Her voice cracks, just slightly, and the child feels the weight of it, the sorrow pressed into every word. They want to ask more, but the look in her eyes stops them. It is a door she cannot open yet. Still, the truth is clear enough. Silence is not strength, it is survival. And survival has cost this family more than they ever admit aloud. The eldest, burdened by years of mediating, begins to show cracks too. One night, they burst out in frustration. "Why can't you just stop? Why can't you let things be?" The middle child answers, voice shaking but firm, "Because letting things be means nothing ever changes. Do you want to live like this forever?" The eldest falters, torn between fear of change and the ache of truth. They whisper, almost to themselves, "At least if things stay the same, we know what to expect." The words sting because they reveal the heart of the struggle. Some cling to silence not out of love for it, but out of fear of the unknown. The middle child understands, but they also know fear cannot be the only guide. The youngest grows bolder in their imitation. When told to hush, they sometimes refuse. When told to clean up, they push back. The parents scold, blaming the middle child, but even their anger cannot erase the spark now burning in the smallest one. Change spreads like fire, creeping into corners no one expected. The father grows harsher, the mother more anxious, the eldest more worn, but the middle child feels both guilty and proud. They did not intend to pass the rebellion on, but perhaps it was inevitable. Silence cracks not just for one, but for all. Then comes a moment that shifts everything again. The family is invited to a distant relative's gathering, a rare occasion. They travel together, sitting stiffly in the car, silence filling the space between them. At the gathering, laughter fills the air. People talk over one another, argue playfully, embrace without hesitation. The middle child watches in awe. It is like stepping into another universe. When a relative asks about school, the child answers confidently, earning praise. The father's eyes narrow, his discomfort visible. He prefers the safety of silence, the order of rules. But here, in this noisy, messy, loving chaos, his silence looks small, out of place. The child notices, and the realization strikes deep. Their family's way is not the only way. There are other models, other possibilities. On the ride home, the father sits rigid, his silence colder than ever. The mother gazes out the window, lost in thought. The eldest fiddles with their hands, the youngest falls asleep. The middle child sits awake, their mind racing. They cannot unsee what they saw. They cannot unlearn the sound of love that is loud and messy and free. And once you know such a thing exists, the hunger for it only grows. At home, the child begins writing more in their hidden notebook. They write not only about dreams of escape, but about the kind of family they hope to create one day. A family where questions are welcome, where laughter fills the table, where silence is chosen for peace, not imposed as control. Each word scribbled feels like a step closer to that future, even if it is far away. The notebook becomes a secret rebellion, a declaration of independence hidden beneath blankets. But rebellion does not stay secret forever. One evening, while cleaning, the mother finds the notebook. She reads only a few lines before closing it, her hands trembling. When the child discovers her holding it, panic flares. But instead of scolding, the mother looks at them with tearful eyes and whispers, "Don't lose this. Don't lose who you are." It is the closest she has ever come to blessing their defiance. The child hugs the notebook tighter, understanding that though she cannot fight openly, she sees them, she believes in them. The father, however, grows more rigid. He begins to sense that his control is slipping, not just over the middle child, but over the family itself. His silence grows harsher, his rules more severe. But each attempt to tighten the grip only exposes more cracks. The middle child no longer trembles. The eldest no longer mediates as eagerly. The youngest no longer obeys without question. Even the mother begins to show flickers of resistance, small sighs, tiny pauses, moments where she does not enforce his rules as strictly. And though the house still feels heavy, something undeniable is happening. The silence is losing its hold. One night, after another tense dinner, the father erupts. His voice, for once louder than silence, fills the room. "This family is falling apart because of you," he says, pointing at the middle child. The words strike like lightning, but the child does not crumble. Instead, they answer, steady and clear. "This family is falling apart because no one is allowed to speak." The words hang in the air, electric, impossible to erase. The father trembles with fury, the mother gasps, the eldest closes their eyes, the youngest stares in awe. For the first time, the truth has been named out loud. That night, the father retreats into his silence, deeper than ever, but everyone knows it is not the same. His power has cracked. His silence is no longer unquestioned, and though fear still lingers, hope burns brighter. The child lies awake, heart pounding, but this time it is not with terror, it is with certainty. The silence will not last forever. The door is opening wider. And once a door is open, no matter how small the gap, light always finds its way through. The father's silence after that night is not the same silence it once was. Before, it was heavy and unchallenged, a wall that everyone had learned to live behind. Now it feels brittle, like glass that has already cracked and might shatter with the slightest pressure. He still sits at the table, still folds his newspaper, still avoids unnecessary words, but there is something unsettled in the way his eyes dart, in the way his hands linger too long on the edges of the paper. He has heard the truth spoken out loud, and though he refuses to acknowledge it, he cannot erase it either. The mother moves through her chores quietly, but her silence too has changed. Where once it was obedience, now it feels like caution, as though she is waiting, watching, unsure of which way the wind will blow. The eldest grows quieter still, disappearing into long hours of study or errands, carrying exhaustion in their shoulders like a hidden weight. The youngest, meanwhile, follows the middle child more closely than ever, imitating them, clinging to their confidence, asking questions that echo the ones the older sibling has already dared to voice. And the middle child, though scared of what they unleashed, carries a strange and undeniable strength. Once you break the silence, you cannot pretend it is whole again. At school, the difference is even more obvious. The child speaks without hesitation, volunteers for projects, defends classmates when teachers scold unfairly. Some whisper that they are reckless, others admire their courage. For the child, it is not about reputation at all. It is survival. Speaking at school is a way of breathing freely, a way of proving to themselves that their voice cannot be silenced completely. And every word spoken in that space makes returning to the muted house harder, but also makes the determination stronger. One evening, while the father works late, the mother sits in the kitchen with her children. The atmosphere is softer without his presence. The eldest helps set the table, the youngest chatters, the middle child leans on the counter. For a moment, laughter bubbles up, real laughter, not the forced kind. It feels fragile and wonderful, like sunlight sneaking through clouds. But when the father returns, the air shifts immediately. The laughter dies, replaced with stiffness. He notices, of course, and his eyes flicker with something like suspicion. The middle child realizes then that the silence is not only his way of living, but also his way of controlling. If silence can be broken by joy, then even laughter is rebellion. The eldest warns again in whispers, begging the middle child to stop. "You're going to break him," they say, their voice trembling. But the middle child only shakes their head. "He's already broken. He just doesn't want us to see it." The words shock the eldest, but deep down they know there is truth there. They have seen the father's weariness, his cracks, his hidden sorrow. They just don't want to face what it might mean. The mother begins to shift in small, almost invisible ways. She no longer scolds the middle child for every word. Sometimes, when the father is not looking, she even nods slightly at them, a subtle sign of solidarity. Once, while cleaning together, she whispers so quietly it is almost lost in the sound of water, "Keep your voice." "I couldn't." "You must." The child pretends not to hear, but those words sink deep, giving them strength even in the hardest moments. The youngest, innocent but bold, starts repeating questions. "Why do we always do this? Why can't we play before chores? Why do we have to be quiet when Dad is home?" Each time, the father glares, the mother hushes, the eldest sighs, but the middle child feels a flicker of pride. Change is spreading, not only through defiance but through curiosity, through the refusal to accept rules without reason. Then comes a day that changes everything again. The family receives visitors, distant relatives who bring noise and stories with them. The house, usually heavy with silence, fills with laughter, with overlapping voices, with arguments that do not break, but instead end in smiles. The middle child watches closely, realizing again that not all families live in fear of words. At one point, a relative jokes with the father, teasing him, making light of his silence. For a moment, just a sliver of a moment, the father almost smiles. The child sees it, and their heart leaps. Perhaps even he remembers what it feels like to live without walls. But the moment vanishes quickly, replaced with the familiar hardness. Still, the glimpse is enough to plant another seed of hope. After the relatives leave, the father grows harsher, perhaps because he felt his control slipping. He enforces the old rules more strictly, his silence sharper, his commands shorter. The mother grows tense again, the eldest retreats further, the youngest grows restless, but the middle child has already seen too much to back down. They begin speaking more openly, sometimes at the table, sometimes in stolen moments with their siblings. They talk of dreams, of freedom, of happiness as something more than survival. The eldest warns, the youngest listens wide-eyed, the mother listens silently, with her eyes full of tears she does not shed. One night the father erupts again, his voice raised louder than ever before. He accuses the middle child of disrespect, of ruining the family, of poisoning the younger sibling with disobedience. The words cut deep, but this time the child does not collapse under them. They answer firmly, "I am not ruining this family. I am trying to save it." The room freezes. The father trembles with rage. The mother covers her face. The eldest grips the table. The youngest gasps. The words hang in the air, impossible to take back. For the first time, the father storms out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that follows is not the old silence. It is broken, jagged, filled with fear and possibility. The mother gathers the children close, her hands shaking. "You must be careful," she whispers, but her voice is not scolding. It is warning and pleading. The middle child looks at her and sees not only fear but also pride. She cannot say it aloud, but she knows the truth too. Silence is no longer enough. Days pass with the father more distant than ever. He speaks little, his silence is sharper, but the power of them has shifted. The family begins to breathe differently in his absence. The mother hums again, softly. The eldest smiles faintly, though they try to hide it. The youngest laughs more freely, and the middle child feels something unfamiliar, the beginning of freedom. They know it will not be easy. They know storms are still coming, but they also know something essential. Silence has lost. It may still linger, it may still fight, but its hold is broken. And once a hold is broken, no matter how strong it once seemed, it can never be the same again. The days that follow the father's storming out feel like walking on ground that might split open at any moment. The house still stands, the routines still play out, but everyone knows something is different. The silence he carries back into the house after that night is not the silence of control anymore. It is the silence of distance. He eats at the table without speaking, leaves early, returns late. His presence is still heavy, but it no longer fills every corner. Instead, it feels like a shadow present, looming, but thinner than before. The mother senses it first. She watches him with wary eyes, noticing the way his hands tremble when he thinks no one sees, the way he avoids her gaze, the way his silence is no longer unbreakable but cracked by exhaustion. She works as she always does, but sometimes she pauses, staring out the window as though searching for something far away. The eldest, though relieved by the father's distance, grows more burdened. They shoulder more chores, keep younger siblings occupied, try to patch holes in a family that feels like it is unraveling thread by thread. The youngest, sensing the shift but not understanding it, grows louder in play, as though filling the house with noise can keep it from collapsing. And the middle child, at the center of it all, feels both fear and freedom mixing like fire and water inside them. They know their words changed everything, and they also know nothing can go back to how it was before. At school, the difference shows too. Teachers notice their boldness. Classmates rally around them, some calling them strong, others reckless. One teacher pulls them aside and says, "You have a fire in you. Use it wisely." The words echo long after, shaping how the child sees themselves. A fire is dangerous, yes, but also warm, also necessary. Maybe their voice is not a curse, but a gift. At home, they begin to speak more openly to their siblings. Late at night, when the house is quiet, they whisper to the eldest, "You don't have to carry everything. It's not your job to keep the peace alone." The eldest shakes their head, insisting it is the only way, but the words plant seeds of doubt. To the youngest, they whisper stories of futures where rules are kinder, where questions are welcome, where laughter is safe. The youngest listens wide-eyed, their imagination catching fire. To the mother they say little, but sometimes their eyes meet, and in that glance is understanding, a promise to carry what she could not. Then comes another Sunday, the day that always brings the heaviest rituals. The soup is made, the bread sliced, the table set, but the ritual feels thinner, weaker, as if it no longer holds the same power. When the father insists on silence during the meal, the youngest giggles loudly, dropping a spoon with a clatter. The father glares, but before he can speak, the middle child says calmly, "It's just a spoon." The words are simple, but they strike like lightning. For once, the father says nothing. He resumes eating, his silence brittle, and in that moment, everyone feels the shift. The old order is crumbling, piece by piece. That night, the middle child writes furiously in their notebook. They write about the table, about spoons and silence, about how power can slip away not with a scream but with a laugh. They write about their father, not as a monster but as a man trapped in his own silence. They write about their mother, still humming in stolen moments, carrying unspoken hope. They write about their siblings, each caught in the same storm but in different ways. And most of all, they write about themselves not as a victim but as a voice that will not vanish. The mother finds them writing and says nothing this time. She only touches their shoulder gently before walking away. That small touch is enough to say everything she cannot. One evening, when the father returns home, he finds the children laughing together in the yard. For a long time, he stands in the doorway, watching, his face unreadable. Then, instead of shouting, instead of demanding silence, he turns away and walks inside. The middle child notices. They realize the fight is not won through arguments alone, but through persistence, through living differently, until even silence cannot hold it back. The eldest begins to change too. They still worry, still try to mediate, but one evening they sit beside the middle child and whisper, "Maybe you're right. Maybe things can be different. It is not a full surrender, but it is the first step, and it feels like the beginning of a new alliance." The youngest, emboldened, starts asking more questions openly, their innocence shielding them from the harshest responses. And the mother, slowly, tentatively, starts to smile again. Not often, but enough to remind everyone that joy is still possible. The father, however, struggles most. He feels the shift, feels control slipping like sand through his fingers. He tries to hold on, but every effort only reveals more cracks. He begins spending longer hours away, returning later, avoiding the table. His silence is still present, but it no longer rules. The family is learning to breathe without it. One night, the middle child gathers their courage and speaks directly to him. "Dad," they say quietly, "I don't want to fight you. I just want us to listen to each other." The father stares at them, his face hard, his silence suffocating. But for the first time, he does not dismiss the words outright. He looks away, mutters something under his breath too quiet to catch, but enough to show that maybe, just maybe, the wall is beginning to crumble. The days stretch on, each one carrying both tension and hope. The family is not healed, not yet, but something has shifted permanently. The silence that once defined them is no longer unbreakable. Voices have entered, laughter has slipped through, truth has been spoken. And once truth is spoken, it cannot be buried again. The middle child knows there are still battles ahead, still storms to weather, still nights of fear and mornings of guilt. But they also know something even stronger. The silence has lost its power, and in that knowledge, there is freedom. Lying awake one night, staring at the ceiling, they whisper to themselves, "We are not trapped forever. We will find a way." The words are small, but they carry the weight of everything that has come before. They are not just a hope, but a promise. And this time, the promise feels real. The house is not the same anymore, though its walls still stand, its roof still shelters, its routines still unfold each day. Something invisible has shifted, something that cannot be undone. Silence still exists, but it no longer holds the same power. It lingers like a ghost instead of a master, a habit instead of a law. The father still sits at the table, still folds his newspaper, still lets his silence speak for him. Yet his silence is different now, weaker, uncertain. The mother still moves through her work, still hums in half-remembered tunes, but her voice is steadier, her eyes more alive. The eldest still carries weight, but sometimes, in moments stolen away from duty, they let themselves laugh without fear. The youngest still plays, still asks questions, still mimics rebellion in small, innocent ways. And the middle child, the one who dared to break silence, walks with a new kind of strength in their step. They are not finished, not free, not unscarred, but they are no longer afraid. One morning, sunlight streams into the kitchen, brighter than usual. The middle child sits with their notebook, scribbling, lost in thought. The mother pours tea, the eldest arranges books, the youngest hums a silly song. The father enters, pauses at the doorway, and for the first time in a long time, he does not command silence. He simply sits. The child glances at him, their pen hovering over the page, waiting for the storm that does not come. Instead, the father clears his throat, the sound rough, uncertain. "What are you writing?" he asks. The room stills. The mother freezes mid-step. The eldest looks up sharply. The youngest stops humming. The child's heart races, but they answer softly, "Dreams." The father says nothing for a long time. His eyes drop to the table. His hands rest on the wood. Then, almost inaudibly, he mutters, "Keep them small." It is not permission, not encouragement, but neither is it a denial. It is the closest he has ever come to admitting that dreams exist at all. The mother exhales quietly. The eldest bows their head. The youngest grins. The child nods, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. They will not keep their dreams small, but they will keep them alive. As days turn to weeks, the cracks in the silence widen. The mother starts telling small stories from her past, not the full truth, not the whole story, but fragments. She speaks of laughter she once had, places she once saw, moments that remind her of who she used to be. The children listen hungrily, piecing together a life that was buried beneath duty. The eldest begins to open too, sharing worries they always carried alone, finally admitting that they are tired. The youngest, fearless in innocence, blurts out wishes at the table. "I want us to laugh more. I want us to eat something different on Sundays. I want us to be happy." The words would have been dangerous once, but now they hang in the air like fragile glass no one dares to break. And slowly, the father begins to shift. He does not laugh, not yet. He does not tell stories, not yet. But he listens longer. He stares softer. And though his silence remains, it no longer smothers. The middle child continues to write. Their notebook grows thicker, filled with words, drawings, dreams. They write about freedom, about joy, about homes built on love instead of fear. They write about their siblings, their mother, even their father. They write not only what is, but what could be. And with each page, the vision becomes clearer. They may still live within the old house, but inside themselves they are building something new. One evening, when the air outside is soft and the stars shimmer above, the family sits together on the porch. The youngest chatters. The eldest leans back with tired relief. The mother closes her eyes to the night breeze. The father sits silent, but this time his silence feels less like a wall and more like a pause, as though he too is listening to the night. The middle child looks at them all and feels something swell inside. It is not perfect. It may never be perfect. But there is love here, tangled and scarred, stubborn and real. And love, even when flawed, is worth saving. The child knows their journey is only beginning. There will be more arguments, more silences, more battles. The father may never fully change. The mother may always carry her buried sorrow. The eldest may always struggle with duty. The youngest may one day face the same questions. But something irreversible has happened. The silence has been cracked. The truth has been spoken. The possibility of freedom exists now, and it cannot be erased. Years later, they will remember this time, not only for the pain, but for the awakening. They will remember the first question asked at the table, the first defiant words, the first crack in the silence. They will remember the fear, but also the relief of finally being heard, even if only by themselves. They will remember how love survived, not in spite of rebellion, but because of it. And they will carry those memories into their own lives, into the families they build, into the voices they raise. For families are not meant to be prisons. They are meant to be roots and wings, grounding us with love, but also giving us strength to fly. And sometimes, to find that balance, someone has to break the silence first. Someone has to risk anger, risk distance, risk everything in order to make space for truth. In this family, it was the middle child. In another, it might be someone else. But the story is always the same. Silence cannot last forever. Love demands a voice. The story of this house ends not with dramatic escape, not with perfect resolution, but with something quieter, stronger, a spoon clattering on a Sunday, a mother's whispered blessing, a father's reluctant question, a child's steady promise. These small moments build into something larger, something unshakable, the knowledge that change is possible, even here, even now. And that knowledge is enough. Lying awake one last time, staring at the ceiling of the house that has both caged and protected them, the child whispers the words that carried them all this way. We are not trapped forever. We will find a way. The words drift into the night, not as a plea, but as a vow. And in that vow lives the future, messy, uncertain, but free.